with age gaps,
You're
right?
not listening. You're
And
not
through
listening, man.
that inference, right, the
Bro, I'm not
60
listening to
and the
anything you're saying.
40-year-old is
You're not
gross.
listening. You're not
Go on,
listening.
go on.
You're not listening. Listen to me. Listen very fucking closely.
Sure,
The
man.
reason why I want to know the necessary conditions of consent is because
Mm-hmm.
think about what we're talking about. I want to know the things that you need to possess. And once you possess these things, you can consent. It's like a checklist, right? And
Mm-hmm.
everything on that list has to be checked for you to consent. If there's 9 things on that list and only 8 things are checked and 1 box is left unchecked, you do not have consent. Okay, you do not have the ability to make an informed consent. Okay, so why am I curious about necessary conditions? Because I'm curious about what conditions are necessary to be fulfilled in order for someone to consent. Right?
So
That's what I'm
now
interested in.
I gotcha, right? But we're talking about like disqualifying conditions, right? Things that would disqualify consent. Now, power hierarchies, right? You've agreed disqualify consent, right?
Yes, of course. No,
Okay.
no, no.
Ah,
Look, no,
oh,
look.
god damn it.
I want to be very clear here. It has to be relevant. It has to be relevant. The power hierarchy has to be relevantly coercive, right? Look,
Mm-hmm.
I agree that there's a very negligible and small power hierarchy just between the age difference of people because we often respect our elders, right? But I think it's negligible. I don't think it's enough to coerce someone into a sexual action, okay? So I
Why
don't
not?
think that because I don't think just for by me being older, I can just literally coerce anyone to have sex with me. You know, like if I'm 40 and I walk up to an 18-year-old girl, do you think just because I'm 40 and we generally respect our elders that she's going to be obliged to give me some pussy? No, it's only when I go up to someone that has fucking faulty mental capacities. They're too young to understand and I manipulate them, right? But that's not that has nothing to do with the age difference. And it has nothing to do with the power dynamic. That has to
So,
do with fucking impaired cognitive faculties and them not understanding relative
so
consequences.
you're not
So
saying
that's
so you're wait, so are you saying, right, that a young person, say 16, around 16 years old, isn't more easily manipulated by a 40-year-old?
not more easily manipulated in such a point that they'd be coercive to give them sex. No,
I'm
not to
just
that point.
asking whether or not between another 16-year-old and a 40-year-old, will a 40-year-old have a higher chance of manipulating someone by that mere age difference?
No,
Okay, why not?
not into having sex. No. Look, I
Why?
don't think there's enough involved. Look, I don't think there's enough involved. I think just because you're 40, right? There's not enough involved in the power dynamic to really like make it uh enough enough of coercive influence. Like think about in contrast, okay? In contrast, think about the employee-employer relationship. Look,
Mhm.
there's paychecks in play. There's the continuation of your being at this job at stake, right? You could get
Mhm.
fired, right? You could get a pay increase. You could get bit more benefits. You could get time off. There's a lot of coercive benefits in things at stake there. A lot to think about. Okay, think about in the student teacher relationship. You could possibly get worse grades, better grades. They would be looked on you harshly, looked on you favorably. There's a lot of things to think about there. And so what I'm saying, and I think there's enough in those two situations, there's enough relevant factors that there's enough coercive influences to that it's going to make it wrong. That there's enough power dynamic so that those factors become overly coercive. Okay. Now, when it comes to just merely being a 40-year-old dude walking up to an 18-year-old girl, right? And she doesn't have to be 16 because we're not trying to play off the fact that she's dumb and naive. We're trying to pay off the fact that my age gives me more influence over her. So think about 40-year-old versus 18-year-old as
Well,
not
no,
to
I'd
be a
rather stick
bias.
with the 16-year-old because I think it
No,
makes
no,
it
no, no,
fair.
no. Because if the 16-year-old arguably doesn't have another necessary condition for consent, and that condition I'm going to argue is called um, basically it's called like a relevant cognitive understanding of the consequences, okay, and relevant cognitive understanding of uh, you know emotional cognitive understanding and understand like actual like
Wait,
what's at
can we
stake,
have
et
this
cetera,
recorded
et
that
cetera.
Shamos thinks that 16-year-olds can't consent?
Yes, I think they can. I think it's possible that they can. But I said earlier, I don't think that every 16-year-old can consent, and I did say that earlier. I'm on the record saying that.
So then the question becomes, right? When on an average 16-year-old, an average 40-year-old, right? Should they be having sex?
What do you mean? If the 16-year-old is able to consent, sure, of course. Why not?
So the answer to that question is yes, then.
No, the answer is if the 16-year-old possesses the necessary conditions to consent, of course it's okay.
Look, we're not going to talk about the extraordinary 16-year-old and the extraordinary 40-year-old. I'm talking
Look,
about.
I'm not going to make a determination. It's case by case. Yeah, if the 16-year-old possesses the relevant capabilities to consent, it's okay. If she doesn't, then it's wrong.
How are you going to determine that?
The same way I would do it anyways. Look, the same way. Look, think about this. If a woman's 40 years old, right? 40 years old, but she's mentally retarded, it's wrong for me to fuck her. Do you agree?
Sure.
Of course it's wrong for me to fuck her, okay? And the reason why it's wrong for me to fuck her is because of her impaired cognitive ability, okay?
But that seems to be going off like the topic, right? Because I'm asking, right, how do you know that? What is the principle? What principles do you
right
use?
fucking now. Listen to me.
Okay. So
the reason why we know that the retard can't consent is because we look at her, we talk to her, we can tell she's fucking retarded. We can tell she doesn't possess the things needed to consent.
Wait, are you appealing to the phenomenon of this person being?
Okay. Listen to me.
Sure.
What I'm saying is, how do we determine that the retard can't consent? We got to be able to look at her and determine she can't consent. So there has to be. You've already agreed. You don't even realize it yet. Maybe because you're too stupid. You've already agreed implicitly that by looking at the retard, there has to be something about the retard that we can say in virtue of that, and we can tell by looking at them and know them by observing them that in virtue of that, they're not able to consent. Okay, so you already. Shut your mouth. Shut your mouth. I'm not done.
For when we want to determine.
I'm not done.
Okay.
I'm not done.
Okay.
Shut your fucking mouth.
Okay, but you got 30 seconds. Go.
Listen, no, I don't got 30 seconds.
You got 30 seconds, or you're rambling.
No, fuck you. I've got as long as I want to take. Okay.
All right. So you want me to keep talking?
No, fuck you.
Sexual predator Shamos, please calm down.
No, fuck you, little faggot.
Whoa, calm down, sexual predator Shamos. So continue. Okay. So if you're not going to continue, I will. Right? Is that okay with you?
No, fuck you, man.
All right. So if you can give me, right, a way which I can reliably determine this 16-year-old is functionally able to have sex with a 40-year-old, right? Seems best practice that we wouldn't just want that to happen, right?
Yeah. Except for I was already giving you the way that you can determine it.
No, you were assuming we had this ability.
Shut your mouth. You've already agreed that there's a way to determine with the retard girl, okay? So you've already agreed there's a way to determine. You have epistemic access. You've already agreed that you have an epistemic access of how to know who's able to consent and who is, okay? Because
all you pointed out is that with someone who has a mental handicap, I can determine if they can. I don't know about a 16-year-old, right? Because they don't have a mental handicap.
So what you've proven is that you can tell when someone lacks the necessary conditions.
Incorrect. I can tell when a person with a mental handicap can't consent, right?
Listen, that's just another way of saying what I just said. Someone who has a mental handicap does not possess one of the necessary conditions for consent.
You can't extrapolate from mental handicap determination to 16-year-old determination, right? Those are two different contexts.
Listen to me. You're too fucking stupid, man. Okay? You're just too fucking stupid.
Get on with it, please. Thanks.
So, listen, you've already agreed that you have a way of telling that this retard person doesn't have one of the necessary conditions to consent, right? Because look, it's wrong for me to fuck her, even if she consents, right? That just means that she's not able to inform consent. What does it mean for her to say that she's not able to inform consent? It means she doesn't possess one of the relevant necessary conditions to consent, to make informed consent. So what is that one? We haven't talked about it. I told you what it is. You have to be relevantly have the right cognitive faculties.
Wait,
and you have to be able to understand.
Can a person with a mental handicap consent to another person with a mental handicap?
No, neither of them are able to consent.
Okay, so you're telling me, right? If someone has a mental handicap, they cannot consent. Right?
Of course not.
To someone else with a mental handicap. Now that would be troubling,
of course
right?
not.
So there's plenty of like.
That doesn't mean we would say that they did something wrong. Of course, we wouldn't hold them accountable.
I've heard from like disability advocates. I've heard from like disability advocates that there's people like they want to like set up and have them have romantic and sexual relationships with each other, like with Down syndrome, right? They want them to like get together. They want them to have sex with each other, right? They want them to have
Look,
right?
it's either the case that those people with Down syndrome, the Down syndrome isn't bad enough to affect the relevant capabilities, or it is, and the people are wrong. I don't care to debate.
So then I can't really just determine on the case of the retarded person.
Look,
right, on that.
Look, I'm telling you right now, I don't care what you fucking say, okay? Well, think about the girl that's 20 years old, right? Okay? Well,
Okay.
it's not just by virtue of the fact that she's 20 that I fucked her and I thought that she could consent, right? It wasn't just because she was 20. Because if she was mentally retarded in 20, I know that I shouldn't fuck her, okay? So you want to know how I knew that I should fuck the girls that I fucked that were 20 years old?
Or 16
Because
years old.
I talked to them. I knew that they were they weren't on drugs. They weren't coercing them. They didn't have a gun to their head. They made a free choice. They weren't impaired. They were cognitively all there. They understood the consequences. And so when all of those things, I understood that about them, I said, this girl can consent. And then I fucked her, okay?
So you can't give me a mechanistic explanation, right, of how you can tell if someone can consent if they're 16 years old. Right?
How are you this stupid? I just told you all.
No, you appealed that you could, right? And I'm asking you how you do it, right? Do you look at, say, okay, if they can answer some math questions, right? You give them some hypotheticals, let's say, about what would you do in a trolley problem or what, right? Like, how do you do it?
What's with this 16? We all know she was 10 years old.
Ooh, even better.
No, I mean, you can't. So what you're saying is this is what your view entails, just to show you how stupid you are, Socradeez.
Okay.
Your view entails skepticism about consent. So what that means is all these bitches that you fucked, you might have raped them, dude. You don't know if you raped them or not.
That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Shamos.
That's what your view entails.
No, it isn't.
Tom, are you listening to this shit? Is any rational person listening to this shit?
Yeah,
but it is technically true that you're saying that you could have raped those girls.
Look, if you're
all right, no, you're right. Technically true, right?
No, listen, motherfucker. If you're telling me that you're skeptical as to whether or not the girls that you fucked could consent, that you have no way of determining whether or not they can consent, that means that every girl you stuck your dick in, you might have raped.
I mean,
that's how stupid your view is.
Right?
That's how stupid your view is.
So what you're saying is, right?
That shows that you're a liar. Because you don't think that you might have raped those
That doesn't
girls.
mean that it's stupid, though, Shamos.
Jovan, that shows that he's a fucking liar. Listen, hold on. I can reason with Jovan because Jovan hates
So what
me,
you
but he
said,
hates reason.
Shamos,
Hold
right,
on, let me
is
talk to
that
Jovan
you
for a
can
second.
have this proprietary idea of what can constitute someone ready to consent, right? That's all you really said. Like, I can just look at someone and tell, right? I have this access, this privileged access to someone who can consent, right? Someone who's mature enough to consent. But when I ask you, how do you do it, right? You don't have an answer for me, right?
Oh,
so how could a third party? Because that's not the important part. The important part is how could a third party verify it, right? So I don't particularly care what you and your first person perspective was, right? On this verifying someone's maturity, right? How can I tell whether you just raped a girl?
Bro,
right?
Listen to me right fucking now, you moron. Okay.
Go for it.
It's not like a standardized test, okay? So if you think that I got a standardized test where I always ask these 15 questions, or I always run her through these specific questions, I don't do that, okay? No one does that. Listen, I don't do that. I'm telling you straight up. I'm being real with you. I'm being honest with you. I don't do that. No one does that. Okay?
No one's saying you're doing that sexual predator, Shamos. I got you.
Listen to me. Just listen to what I'm saying. If that's what you're looking for, then you win. Because I don't got that, okay? But what I do is what every other sensible person does that fucks a girl, okay?
A 12-year-old or a 14-year-old, yeah.
He talks to her, right? And he knows things about this girl, okay? And he fucking knows she's not fucking mentally crazy. She's
so
not
what did you know about the 12-year-old when you fucked her? You didn't have a conversation.
Listen, we're not talking about fucking 12 years old. We're not talking about 12 years old.
We're talking about the efficacy, or whether or not age is a decent proxy.
No,
right?
What we're talking about, don't be dishonest, motherfucker.
No,
what we're talking about right now is an epistemic question of how you can know someone possesses the necessary conditions to consent. In the age, we weren't asking about 12-year-olds.
We're talking about disqualifying conditions to consent.
We were just asking of anyone that can consent, how can we know it?
We
How
were
can we know it?
talking about disqualifying conditions for consent, right? Now, the
No, but
things we
that's
talked
the
about
same
before were
thing.
power dynamics, right? No, because necessary conditions, right? That could be tough. That could be relative, right? But we can talk about things that disqualify consent.
Look, you don't
Power dynamics
understand.
disqualify consent, right? We didn't even talk about
Listen to
necessary
me.
conditions.
Listen to me. Necessary conditions for consent, right, are the same things. You can form them negatively or positively, right? You're just saying that, like what I'm saying is the necessary conditions for consent. You're just phrasing them negatively, and I'm just phrasing them positively.
Well,
We're
I'm talking
saying the
about
same thing.
sufficient conditions to preclude consent, right?
Yes, but all you mean by that is, when you have a power dynamic, right?
Mhm.
This is what means negates consent, right? And all I mean is that, so the necessary condition would be not having an abusive, coercive power dynamic. So it's formed negatively, right?
Right.
So we're saying the same thing, you fucking moron.
So
There's
when you
just
said, right, that age plays a coercive, has a coercive place, right, in a relationship between a 14-year-old and a 40-year-old or a 60-year-old even, right? You said there was none, right? Now we would talk about
no.
whether
I
or not
just
that
said it
is the
was
case.
negligible.
Right. Why do you think it's negligible?
I don't think just being 40 years old is enough to convince an 18-year-old girl to have sex with you just because you're 40.
So you're saying that there's no reasonable coercive aspect to age.
Not enough. You don't just get 18-year-old girls to fuck you because you're 40 and 50. In fact, usually being 40 or 50 disqualifies them from wanting to fuck you. Okay? So that's just the fact of the matter. Okay? That's just sensible people being honest with themselves. Okay, but you're being a dishonest little faggot right now, so I doubt you would concede that. Okay, it just so happens that being 40 years old does not make you a prime candidate for jumping in an 18-year-old's pants. Usually, they don't want to fuck you at all. So I just told you it's negligible. Just being 40 is not enough. No, but being an employer and an employee is enough. Being a fucking teacher and a student is enough. But just being a 40-year-old dude, no, that's not enough to get most 18-year-old girls to fuck you. Being a teacher, yeah, being their teacher, that's enough to get most girls to fuck you. Yeah. Okay. Being their boss, yeah, that's enough to get most girls to fuck you. But not just being a 40-year-old. It's Jovan, do you think I'm being crazy right now? Seems pretty fucking straightforward to any sensible, non-dishonest person. But Socradeez
No, it
just wants
doesn't
to
sound
engage in
crazy.
dishonesty.
No, it doesn't sound crazy, but I already agreed that the age is just a proxy, right? So you can keep arguing that. I'm saying that age has
So
this
you've already lost the
inherent.
argument.
No, I already told you from the onset that it's a proxy, right? And I said whether or not, and I literally said this like multiple times, right? Whether or not it's reasonable to use age as a proxy. And then you said something about me and John, I think the pragmatics, but we're talking about
Bro, I
whether or not
told you I'm
age,
interested in
whether or not a
necessary.
16-year-old and a 40-year-old, right? Whether there's no quantitative difference there that we can use age as a proxy to determine, right?
I just told you. Look, some 16-year-olds are going to be able to consent and some aren't, right? If you just
Right.
if you just want to say, nope, let's just make a blanket rule, all
I also
16-year-olds.
No, I told you I don't care about the extraordinary people, right? I'm talking about whether or not, in general, this is a good thing to have, right? Whether or not, if you
No,
see a
I don't.
16-year-old and a 40-year-old fucking, whether or not alarm bells should be going off, whether or not you should be precluding shit,
No, not
right?
for me. No, because I don't reason the way that you do. I don't reason the way that you do. I
Well,
don't
if
just
you
say, "Oh my God, she's 16 and
I
40.
mean,
It
we
must be
know
wrong
that
in every
you're a
example. It
sexual
must be wrong in
predator.
every case. It has to be wrong because she's 16." No, I'm
No
smart
Like I,
enough
shit.
and
We know
I'm
you don't
level
think
enough to say,
correctly.
yeah, it might be wrong. It might be right though. If she's 16 and she's able to actually consent and then it might be okay. But yeah, if she's not and she's naive, and she doesn't understand the consequences, he's manipulated her, then of course it's wrong. I don't rule every case it's wrong. It's wrong. I'm not fucking stupid like you or hypersensitive or cucked like you, okay? I'm smart enough to know that I don't just say, oh, she's 20 or she's 40. Of course you can fuck her. No, I said, dude, she's mentally handicapped. It doesn't matter if she's 40. Age means nothing to me, dude. Nothing.
just seems ridiculous.
You're a faggot.
Wow.
No, my
Very
view is complete. Go ahead. Tell me what's wrong with my view. Tell
So
me what's wrong
again,
with my view.
right.
Come
So I would
at me.
say, all right. So when we're talking about age, right, it comes with a host of things, right? Talk about like career advancement. Talk about the other connotations of being advanced in age, right? All these things can imply power dynamic. Not to mention,
Look,
we can't-
Socradeez, fucking Shamos is talking about age, talking about every age as an experience. Shamos would say that experience goes into what he considers. It's not age solicitor, it goes into what he considers.
What's the minimum age that can consent in
to me,
in Shamos's view? What's
Oh.
the minimum age that can consent?
I don't
There
know.
would be no minimum age if
Do
they
you think
could
like a
consent.
1-year-old? Do you think a 1-year-old could consent?
I mean, it's probably like
smart
probably
enough.
not possible. It's probably not metaphysically possible, But I mean, so I mean, I don't know what the answer to that question is,
Well, shouldn't you be able to do the thought experiment, right? Like it's like the Matrix. We just get this to download this like 20 years worth of information, and now they have the mental faculties of like a 20-year-old. In that case, do you think it would be appropriate for the biological 1-year-old to consent to having sex with like a 40-year-old?
Yeah, it'd be fine then, yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah,
No,
I don't
like
see a
think about it.
problem.
No, think about it like this. Think about it like this, right? Imagine like, have you ever heard of like Second Life? I don't know a whole lot about it, but it's like kind of like a virtual. Do you know what I'm talking about, Iron?
Iron has
Yeah.
control in Shamos. He can't.
Okay, so just listen. Like, imagine that me and my wife, right? Imagine that like far into the future, Second Life basically became like fully 3D, right? And like once you got into it, like it's like basically like the Matrix. Once you got in it, you couldn't distinguish it from reality, right? But like, let's say that people knew, you could know when you were in the Matrix, just like when Neo went in, he knew he was in the Matrix at that time. He didn't know it before he got red pilled, but presumably you could you would know when you would go into the Second Life. So what I'm saying is, me
Yeah.
and my wife, we have a committed relationship, and we go in and we take on these avatars of like, 1-year-old kid, and then I take on a 40-year-old man, right? And then she allows me to like touch her, but lick her titties and touch the little kid's butt or whatever like that, and she consents to doing it or whatever. And do I think that there's anything wrong with that? No, not technically. I mean, it might be like, you might be able to make an argument like, well, look, if he's really into like messing with young kids, it might give him like desires to like actually do it outside of the Matrix, or where it could matter. Maybe you could forward an idea like that, but like ultimately, is that instance right there wrong? No, it's not. So yeah, if they somehow a 1-year-old could have all of the relevant mental capacities and all the emotional stabilities and all the things needed to consent, of course a 1-year-old could let you fucking rub its nipples and it would be okay. If I'm just saying, now, is that
That's
likely?
fantastic. Thank you.
Oh my
I
god.
appreciate your
Look,
great
Iron,
perspective.
let's say that I
Is
was
this
to be.
recorded?
Let's say that you were to be implanted into like a 3-year-old's body, right? Would you say that you would have to wait to mature for you to have sex, even though you have
Yeah,
all the
of course.
even though you have
That
all
is
the mental,
ridiculous.
you have all the mental faculties of a fucking
These guys are
30-year-old
idiots,
virgin?
Jovan. These guys are idiots. Even Squishy doesn't get it either. They don't understand that my position is completely defensible. Like, I have the most defensible position. You guys are in the idiot seat. They don't even get it, Jovan. They're that stupid.
This doesn't seem.
I don't think the boundaries for appropriate sex hinge just on the mental capacity to consent.
What do you mean? It depends on consent, right? Now, consent,
not in
like
my
I said,
view.
look.
Iron doesn't think a fly can fuck another fly because it's only a day old.
No, I never said that. Obviously,
A
different
fly
animals
could never consent
different
because
animals
it's only
have
a day
different
old.
rules, right?
The point
know
is,
why you
Iron,
would
there's
say
nothing
that.
inherent in a year, right? That's going to make something okay for consent.
No, I disagree. I think that there's bodily differences between 1-year-olds and 40-year-olds that makes it.
Yeah, but you're not appealing to the year. Then you're appealing to the biological trait that has a correlation with that age.
That's
But it's
what the
not the
year
age
means.
itself that you're tracking. It's the biological. Do you understand? You're not worried about the age, right? If the
Well, I'm talking
biological
about the age of their
features,
body, right?
if the biological features existed early, right? If somehow we developed very fast, right, and our cognitive faculties developed really fast,
That would be
it
an
wouldn't matter.
equivocation.
It wouldn't matter if we were just 1 year old. If
That
we
would
developed,
be an equivocation.
What do you mean? I'm saying that the body would still be the same.
Yeah, the
not
colloquial
equivocation.
the colloquial meaning of saying somebody's 1 year old means that they've gone through 1 year of normal human development, right? Obviously, if we were like a completely different animal, we'd probably talk about it in different ways. So what you're saying
Yes,
is
but
equivocation.
listen, don't you understand the difference between? You got to understand that we're trying to pull out the difference between merely 1 year, and you're saying no, 1 year is connected to these necessarily connected to these biological features, and it's in virtue of these biological features of 1 year old to what makes it wrong. Now I was saying it's,
Yeah.
and I agree with you. You're exactly right. It's in virtue of the biological features. It's not in virtue of the age, because we could make a scenario up, right, in which the age is still 1 year, but the biological features are different, right? And it's okay then. But you somehow you're in crazy town because you thought it was still wrong. You thought somehow it was still wrong.
No, that'd
Which
be
is
an
just
that'd be an
insane.
equivocation on the meaning of age, or the way that we use age colloquially to date the physiology of people.
I'm still
No,
wondering
no,
how you can
no
determine a
shit.
16-year-old
No shit.
is
You,
mature, because like
Iron, no
imagine
shit. It's
in
not
your
how we do it.
in your position, right? In your position, which it just seems to be like we look at someone's like attitudes, right? And then from there we make a personal judgment on whether that person can consent,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So
How
a
isn't
pedophile,
that
well,
what
hold
you did
on.
with every girl you
Pedophile.
fucked?
So when a pedophile, like say, goes to a 12-year-old, talks to them, learns their desires, learns who they are as a person, right? And they say, I think this person can consent. They seem really mature to me.
You're just trying to poison the well.
No, I'm wondering, in virtue of what can I disqualify that person's assessment?
Look, stop trying to poison the well by talking
No,
about the pedophile.
is that not, Jovan, is that not a good question about his position?
Listen to me. Just
Hold
let
on,
me.
you appeal to Jovan. I'm asking Jovan. Jovan, please, sanity check me. If you say it's wrong, then I'll reconsider it.
Well, there are things you could appeal to, but I'd like to hear what Shamos had to say about it.
Look,
Okay.
what I'm saying is he's trying to poison the well. Just listen to me. Stop framing it in terms of the 12-year-old and any of that stuff, because you're specifically trying to play off the age difference there, right? And you're using that to poison the well. So
No, these are the
what I
relationships
think,
I'm interested in, right? These
what's
are the ones I
that?
want to. These are the ones I want to like look at to see how to find them, right? These are the ones I'm looking for to say like, no, this is wrong, right? So you're saying my view is just batshit crazy, but in your view, you make a personal assessment of the other person, and they say, all right, well,
Yeah,
that's good
yes.
enough for
Listen to
me,
me. This is what I
right?
just remembered I was going to say. Jovan, this
Okay.
is what I wanted to say. This is all I'm putting forward. This is a very common sense view. Think about me and a 20-year-old girl. Don't think about the 12-year-old for a second. We're going to use this scenario as an analogy to
I think
then
I
make
know exactly what you're going to
generalizations.
say, but go ahead.
So listen, and this should be very, very common sense, very straightforward, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I go to fuck this 20-year-old girl, right? Okay, I don't just say, and I said this earlier to you in this conversation, I don't just say she's 20, and in virtue of her being 20, I get to fuck her. Okay, doesn't mean that. She could be 20 and really drunk, and it would be wrong for me to fuck her, right?
Mm-hmm.
If she could be 20 and I could have a gun in my pocket,
Yeah,
and it
there
could
could
be
be a
wrong for
bunch
me
of
to fuck her.
coercive. There could be a bunch
Okay.
of like
Yeah,
situations.
yeah. Listen. So what I do is I make an assessment, right? I mean, I have to, right? In order to know that I'm not raping this girl or being coercive to her, I have to make every girl that I fuck, right? In order for me to know that I'm not raping them, I have to have justifications to think that they're in a condition to consent, right?
Okay, yeah.
You
So
see?
this
So what I so
we've
I
agreed
just
so
I
far.
run through a general kind of checklist, man. I run through a
So
general kind of checklist. Okay,
so
here's
far
what it
I'm
is.
with you. Yeah, so far I'm with you. All right,
Okay,
everything I've
here's
agreed
what
to.
it
Yeah.
is. I run through a general checklist, okay? Is this girl being coerced in any way? Okay, is there any power dynamic at play here or any coercive influence at play here that's relevant enough to coerce sexual behavior where she wouldn't want? Okay? And if I see that that's not present, right? Then I ask another question. Okay? Is she cognitively capable of assessing the consequences, understanding the ramifications emotionally, physically, etc.? Is she competent, cognitively competent to make the decision first place? Okay, so cognitively competent, check. Not coerced, check. Not under the influence of anything, check. Okay, after that point, I stick my dick in, dude. That's just it. Okay, I'm sorry. That's
all
that's just it.
Shamos has been saying the entire time is that age is not a necessary condition.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about age as a necessary condition. I'm saying it was a useful proxy. So when Shamos
don't be
talks
a
about
skeptic.
saying that age is like this necessary condition I'm talking about, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying whether or not age is a useful proxy, right? Now you keep telling me that it's not. You can just talk to someone and say, "Yep," by just the mere talking to them, right? And of my own unaccessible intentions, right? I can determine.
Isn't that what everyone does, though? Is that what everyone does, though, bro?
Kinda. No, you're right, but like
No,
you
yeah,
just
yeah,
said,
I fucking kinda am right. That is what
right?
everyone does.
Except what you are going to preclude, right, is if we start saying, well, if they can't consent because of this, right, then you're going to say, well, what about these exceptional cases, right? Because there are exceptional cases in almost any situation, right? Then we can't use those as necessary conditions, right? So, for example, in the drunk case, well, what if you're drunk, right? And I know you said this before, that you being drunk with someone else is fine, right? So if you're drunk and someone else is drunk, normally being drunk precludes consent, but now you're drunk, you can accept consent. What does that mean about being drunk? How is that a useful, necessary condition?
Confused. What the fuck are you even talking about, bro? You're saying that I agreed that two drunk people could consent to have sex with each other? That's not my view.
So you're saying the opposite.
No, what I'm saying is there's situations in which you can pre-consent, right? But I mean, I don't think just because it's like, oh, we're both drunk, it cancels itself out. It's not, bro.
Right.
It's not like that,
so
man.
being drunk or
Two
not
drunk
isn't
people,
like
two
consent.
drunk people aren't in a position to consent. But there are instances where two people are in a couple, they go out and get drunk, and they pre-consent. They know they're going to go out and get drunk. They know they're in a relationship. They've had sex before, and it's called pre-consent. What that means is they know that they're going to go out and get drunk, and they know they've had sex before, and they've already consented to having sex, and they're going to consent to even having sex drunk, knowing that they're both drunk, even when they're sober. And so that's okay. But if just two drunk people at a party, oh, I'm drunk, you're drunk, oh, it doesn't matter, it's all okay now. No, that's not okay. Those people,
I think that's an
cannot
equivocation.
consent.
I think
Those
there's an
people can't
equivocation
consent,
going on
dude.
here. Because when we talk about giving consent, we talk about in the sense of like giving an informed consent and then that consent being accepted, right? But the way you just use it is just consent in the sense of mere acquiescence, right? So when you go out and you're drunk, you say, yeah, I wanna fuck, right? In one sense, that's consent, and in another sense, that's not, right? One sense,
Bro,
it's
that's
consent.
not what I mean by consent. I don't
Right,
mean
but
the
you
verbal utterance of agreement.
Right.
That's
But
never what I meant by consent this whole time. Every time I've said the word consent, that's never been what it's meant. Never. Not once have I meant them verbally saying, yeah, okay.
Okay,
That's never been what I meant.
Right. So, right, when we talk about consent in the drunk case, right, they're gonna have to acquiesce you have to acquiesce to having sex, right, when they're drunk. Right.
What don't you understand?
What I'm getting at is when we talk about the pre-consent, right? Now that consent just can't carry out. You can't just consent to something that you're not there for, right? They have to be present there. That consent has to be maintained, right?
Bro, are you fucking stupid? You don't understand the idea of a pre-consent.
I don't even know what the
understand.
fuck you. I don't even know what the fuck you meant right there. Sorry.
All right, sorry.
This guy is fucking. This is what people do when they try to go versus me. They're so irrational.
Pre-consent is incoherent.
No,
They have
it's not
to be there to
incoherent.
maintain the pre-consent.
Yeah, no, we have to be able to maintain consent, right? Like when you say, just drop the drunkenness for a second, right? When you're having sex with someone, right, you can infer that they're still consenting, right, like the entire time, and then you usually infer, or you can tell when they say stop, right? Like these are the cues that we look for, right? But there's the idea of maintaining consent over an action. So when you're drunk, right, the point I'm going to get at is, it seems like being drunk is not a disqualifying condition in this case.
Well, I wouldn't think that.
I never ever posited getting drunk simpliciter, right? So getting the proxy for the necessary condition is whether or not your cognitive faculties are impaired, right? You have to have proper cognitive faculties and understand the relative consequences. Now, I assume that that gets negated when you drink, okay?
Yeah.
And so look, what you don't understand, if you don't understand pre-consent, right? Then I'm not going to sit here and I'm not trying to sit here and get into a
No,
philosophical.
I agree with pre-consent, right? I think that's a fine thing, right? But from this position, when you talk about pre-consent and being able to maintain consent, when you're drunk, you don't have the cognitive faculties yet. You can still infer consent somehow, right? On virtue of what can you still
I
infer
don't
consent?
understand what you're asking. There's only one situation in which a person who's drunk could consent, and that has to do with what I've talked to pre-consent. In every other situation, it's wrong.
So you told me
Every
though,
other
you have like a
situation.
checklist, right?
I would like to ask a question though. So if two people meet in a bar and they're both drunk, if they have sex, are they raping each other, or is it just?
No, it's just I don't know if it's necessarily apt to call it rape or whatever, but I think what I would just say is that they're just both not in the position to consent, right? Now,
Well,
now counterfactually, it might be the case that some of those people that get drunk and fuck would counterfactually, when they were sober, would have wanted to do so or had done so anyways. Okay, and I think maybe in those situations, that's almost like a pre-consent in a sense, right? So I think for those instances, it's fine. But for every other instance, I mean, if you just go get drunk and she's drunk and shit happens, you fuck. Yeah, I mean, dude, y'all weren't in the position to consent. Maybe you would have done it anyways, and that's oftentimes the people that would have done it anyways don't look at it as that they were raped. But if the girl wouldn't have done it anyway, she oftentimes will be like, "Damn, I got raped, right? I got taken advantage of, right? I wouldn't have done
but you
that."
told me that there's
Yeah,
a
what about
checklist.
the? See, but it also goes same for the guy too, right? Though, because she has it. So it'd
Oh
be.
yeah, obviously, yeah. I was just saying it's just more common for the girl. That's why.
But it's just weird because I mean, having sex with somebody without consent is going to be something like a necessary thing for rape, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is,
Right.
technically it would be rape. But what I'm saying is, when we look at that instance, we don't like to
It
call
just
that
seems
instance rape.
absurd to say
No.
that
I
they
agree
both rape each
that
other.
we don't call those instances rape. Okay, but
But they are.
technically speaking, it would be rape. In the most strictest technical sense, if you were to be super strictly technical, so it technically would be rape. Honestly, it would. But I mean,
So
we
from this
don't look
position, we
at
have
it, and
like
I understand
rape with
that we
finalists.
wouldn't call that. We don't look at that instances as rape, and I understand that.
How
So
come you
I'm
don't
okay.
understand that with kids?
No. I understand it. With what I'm saying is the kids can't consent, right? But we just don't hold them responsible just because they're young kids or something like that. But there's a difference between not holding someone responsible and them being able to consent, right? And so
No, you gave us
It's
that big
similar.
speech
I
about
am.
how
You can
you're
make
such
an
a big brain
analogy.
guy.
You can make an analogy to the drunk, right? It's not the fact that you drink that makes it so you can't consent. It's the fact that your cognitive faculties are messed up that makes it so you can't consent.
No, listen, he
right.
said
If you could
he said
drink
that
10 beers or 10,000 beers and still have perfect cognitive faculties, then it'd be fine.
listen, you said you could understand sometimes where drunk people would have sex, it would be okay. But you're saying we just blindly say that's wrong with drinking. But then when it comes to kids, for some reason you have this double standard where you're saying instead of applying the blind standard that's wrong to fuck kids, you're going to arbitrate individually which kids are okay to fuck.
No, the reason for the
No,
people
I'm
getting
willing to
drunk is the
arbitrate
fact that their
individually for
cognitive
people that have
faculties are
drank.
messed up. Like you're taking away. It's basically the same reason for the kids is that their cognitive faculties are not in the right spot for them to consent.
Yeah, it's directly analogous. And I told you I'd be willing to make an exception on a case-by-case basis for the drunk. If there's a certain person that could drink 10 beers and he still be perfectly cognitively fine and it not affect him, I mean, there are some people who are crazy alcoholics that they could drink 10 beers and still be fine. Then yeah, I would say
what I was
that
getting at before, though, right? You said you had a checklist. If they're
Wait,
drunk or
hold
they're
on.
cognitively impaired. Okay, go for it.
No, just ask about this last one, right? So we've gone over two hurdles. We've gone over like being really young. We've gone over being really drunk. What about if you're wearing a ski mask and you jump out of the bushes and you rape a woman? Could you imagine a scenario where she sees that as like a pleasant surprise and then she retroactively consents or somehow pre-consents?
well, like I don't think she could
That's actually good.
pre-consent. I think it would be retroactive consent. I don't really know how I feel about that. I don't really think that that's a thing. I think only
You mean you can't
pre-consent.
imagine
I don't
a
think there could be
circumstance like that?
something.
You can't imagine a circumstance where a girl is into rough porn, and then she goes out and she
No,
like
no,
gets
no. I
jumped
could
by the
imagine a
man.
situation. I could imagine a situation in which she retroactively was like, "Oh, well, you know, like she would consent retroactively." Like, but I
You would
mean, like
approve
it's
of
hard. It's
you'd
like
approve of that circumstance.
the thing is when he's messing with her sexually and she's not consenting, then he's basically raping her, right? And it's only up until the point where she changes her mind, and whenever that retroaction happens, that's when it no longer becomes rape. But it's still true that any instance before that retroaction, those were still instances of rape. So I mean,
Yeah, but no,
look, I'll just make a blanket statement. The only type of none of those are going to work. Okay, retroactive consent, I'm just going to say fails all the way around. Only pre-consent can work. So that just means that my statement earlier has to be amended, so that the person that when you're drunk and then you look back on it and say, well, I would have done it when I was sober, you still weren't able to consent, and that retroactive consent doesn't count. That's what I'll say. Only pre-consent.
right, but pre-consent. So if a girl is like into rough porn, right, and she's like, "Oh man, it'd be great to get jumped by some guy from the bush," and then she just incidentally happens to be the one that gets jumped by a guy, pops out of the bush, and like simulates raping her. You would think that's an appropriate situation.
I think there would have to be more specific. Like she'd have to know that like you were that guy or something. Like you couldn't just like do it and she'd not know that she might think that she was getting raped. Like it would all depend. Like I mean, like what I'm saying is like all of those are very context sensitive. You know what I mean?
Well, then we just imagine that.
But you can imagine a scenario where you'd be okay with that. Then is what you're saying.
What I'm saying is I can imagine a scenario in which a girl says to her boyfriend, like, look, I really love a rape fantasy, like, could you literally on Tuesday when I go out to get the mail, just wear a different color shirt, wear different color shoes, wear a ski mask, don't say anything so I plausibly don't know it's you, and then just rape the living shit out of me. And then he goes up and does it and he rapes her like that, and then I think that's fine. I think stuff like that's okay. Yeah, I could. Yeah,
I think,
fine.
With Iron's example, I would just say that's
example.
consent at the time. It wouldn't be pre-consent. She would just be consenting when he jumps out and tries to grab her, and she'd be like, "Okay, just go ahead and fuck me. Here we go. This is nice." So that'd be the consent.
It just seems like a really bad way to orientate society.
Yeah.
I mean, so whatever. That's different.
Look, you can still arrest a man
from whether or not it's consensual or not, whether or not that's okay for them to do because it's consent. So,
yeah, that's retarded because you can still arrest the man for attempting to rape her, right, for his intentions and what he tried to do, but you could still say ontologically it's not actually rape.
You wouldn't be able to arrest him because if you had full information, you wouldn't be able to push charges because they both consented.
You know what
anyways, I don't see how any of this is relevant. I mean,
well, attempted rape is usually like when a rape fails. It means there's like a rape in progress.
We can flash out a lot of the details.
In progress in this case.
We can flesh out a lot of the details on a lot of these like crazy cases and stuff. I mean, for the most part, I've forwarded a very commonsensical view of consent, right? And obviously, it has nothing to do with age. It has to do with like mental faculties, coercion, and not being impaired, having those faculties impaired. Maybe like one or two other things that I can't think of.
So there's a precocious 12-year-old, right? And they seem to be really mature, right? Seem to be like a 20-year-old, right?
Mm-hmm.
You'd be fine fucking that 12-year-old, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure.
It's not like I would be fine fucking her. I'm just saying that like it's just tautologist, dude. It's just like if that 12-year-old possessed the qualities, right, that it took for her to consent, then of course, trivially true as a tautology, she would be able to consent. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, if I go up to a 12-year-old, and if the 12-year-old acted in the same way that the 20-year-old acted, and I mean, what would be so like if all the conversation I ever had with that 20-year-old, right, all the justifications I ever had to fuck that 20-year-old, I had with the 12-year-old, what could I appeal to besides the age? Nothing. I think even Jovan would see in that instance. There's nothing you could appeal to. It would have to be right.
Right. And so you're saying this 12-year-old could reasonably exist in the real world, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so there are 12-year-olds out there who are like this is a claim, right? There are 12-year-olds out there who are fine to fuck.
Yeah, but I think they're extremely rare. I mean, there's been 11-year-olds that graduated from Yale, and so I'm just
Well, that
saying, I'm
doesn't
not
apply to
saying that just.
their
I'm not
implications.
saying just in virtue of graduating from Yale means that you're able
Okay.
to get cock put in. I'm just
It's a
saying
good
that, like,
indicator, right?
no. I'm not saying that's a good indicator. I'm just saying that obviously those
There's
people
some that
definitely,
deviate from the norm.
obviously, yeah. I'm just saying that there are certain people, right, that are going to exist, outside of the bell curve. So certainly, I think that 12 is probably right on the line. I know that there's been 12-year-olds that have graduated from Yale, so certainly they're more cognitively able to understand consequences than a 20-year-old. They're just way in a way better position. Now that doesn't
Socrates,
mean
are you
they're
saying
emotionally. That doesn't mean they're emotionally intelligent. Doesn't
are
mean they're
you
emotionally stable.
are you saying that there are no 12-year-olds that can consent?
Yeah.
I was asking Socrates.
Oh, me. I'm saying that we should take it to be the case that there are no 12-year-olds that can consent.
But that's not the question, though.
Well, the entire time I've been talking about whether or not we should treat 12-year-olds as like viable.
You're just trying to reframe everything. In terms
No,
of
I've been saying this the entire time, right? Whether or not age is a good enough proxy.
You're just doing the John faggot pragmatism stuff.
So
I understand.
All right, good.
It's what
So
faggots do
that's
all
what I
the
said at
time
the very
when they can't
beginning,
argue.
right? So you can
It's what
meme
faggots
elsewhere.
do all the time when they can't
So,
argue.
Look,
They just move on
Shamos-
to pragmatism.
I don't think Shamos would deny that age is a useful proxy.
No,
And it
he did
seems-
deny it.
Huh?
He did deny it. In fact, I said specifically, is age
don't
a
think
good
he did
proxy?
that.
He said no.
No. Look, what I said is that you couldn't just use age as 100% deontological principle. What he was trying to forward, Tom, is that if they're 16, no, they can't consent. Okay, period. That's just it, right? And I was saying, no, that's not. I was saying it's on a case by case basis,
Are you
and
forgetting
I'm not
every
just.
other
I'm
time where I
not
was
the
trying
type
to
of
tell you
person that's just going
about
to say.
whether
No, I agree, and I've always maintained that you can use age as a reliable indicator. Okay, it's good correlate. There's a good correlation between age and cognitive function that we're
So then when
looking to
I was
track.
talking about whether or not age was a good proxy, right? And you said, no, we're just going to talk about the necessary conditions. When I said, I'm not interested in that, I'm asking whether or not we should treat age as a good proxy, right? You're
Yes.
saying this entire time, the question of that is just yes. When you could have just said, yes, I think it's a good proxy.
I've
However,
maintained that for years. Don't act like this is something
when
that
you
I just
fuck the
brought up.
12-year-old.
No, I've maintained that this has been my. You act like I've like hidden that or something. I've maintained that forever. The way that you formulated it earlier was that if they're 16 and they're a 40-year-old, it's always wrong. And I said, no, dude. And you said, don't you think that age is a good proxy? And what I thought you meant is that 16, 40, always wrong. And I said, no. I said, dude, no.
But then when I start
16-year-old
talking about like the differences and what that means, right? And I kept saying as just a proxy for other things, right? At any point you could have said, well, I think it is a good proxy.
It should be retardedly uncontroversial that there's a correlation between age and cognitive faculties. Okay?
So when we had that discussion, I said, oh, it's really fucking weird to want to go off on a 16-year-old, right? And like, why is that weird? Why you played non-cognitivist? Why I thought that was fucking creepy or gross, right? This is not really comporting with what you're saying now.
Bro, then you're just confused, okay?
Oh, okay.
You're just confused. This is
Okay.
very common with you, okay? Because
Sure.
this isn't like something I'm like trying to be dishonest about. I've had this view forever. I've defended this view fucking 100 times, okay?
That
Tom's
age is a
heard
good
me.
proxy.
He knows that I think that it's, dude, it's so trivially true that fucking there's a correlation between age and cognitive faculties. 1-year-olds have very deficient cognitive faculties. 10-year-olds have much better cognitive faculties. 20-year-olds have much better cognitive faculties than 10-year-olds. That's uncontroversial, dude. You really think I deny some shit like that? Really, motherfucker?
You're hopping
Look,
back and
that's the
forth.
whole point, right? I just listened to what supposedly the disagreement was, and I just knew that Shamos didn't say that because it was stupid.
Shamos is hopping back and forth between the abstract realm and the real world. He's saying like, oh, this is all abstract if there happens to be this 12-year-old that's capable. But then he's also
So what
saying
is it
in
you
the
guys
real world-
disagree on?
Well, I disagree that in the real
Actually,
world
hold on a
there's
second.
12-year-olds
Now
that he can
Shamos
fuck.
question about I don't know what we were just talking about, but why don't you answer the question? Do you think that there's a 12-year-old out there that can give consent?
He answered, but he reframed it in terms of pragmatism.
Yeah, I want the actual question answered as it was presented, not a reframing of the question.
So what he's asking you, Socrates, is do
Hey, I
you
thought he was
think
asking me or
that
Shamos.
it's possible that there exists a 12-year-old?
Wait, Tom, are you
Okay.
asking me or Shamos?
He's
That's
asking
you,
you, dude.
man.
Listen,
I'm
pay
sorry,
attention,
I thought you
man.
said Shamos. Do
Pay
I think
attention,
no?
dude.
I think there probably isn't. No, I don't think there is.
You don't think there is?
Yeah, I don't think there is.
What's the argument for that?
I'd just be
Uh,
agnostic on it. I don't know why you'd say you don't think there
Well,
is.
okay, no, you're right. I am agnostic. I just have this. I have this feeling that there isn't, but I can argue that there isn't.
So is this reducing to just your feels or what?
Sure, I guess I'm agnostic on it, right? I don't know.
Yeah, but
You don't have.
I can have an
argument.
opinion, right?
like Shamos has given you inferences, inductive inferences to why 12-year-olds might exist that can consent. And you're
Mhm.
just offering your feels?
Sure.
Okay. Meanwhile, you're talking about Shamos's view being crazy and all that, right? All right. Okay,
I was,
guys.
yeah.
Good job.
So I don't understand really the contention either, because normally there's going to be a mental issue when fucking a 12-year-old, right? But it seems like they have more of a problem with, or they don't even have a problem with the mental aspect. It's more of a problem with just the fact that you're fucking a 12-year-old body.
Yeah, didn't you remember when you asked Iron? He just bit the bullet on it, and how absurd that was.
Yeah.
Remember when you said if you implanted the consciousness into the 1-year-old body, would it still be wrong? And then he said yes.
Yeah, I
But like,
don't think
what's
that's
the
absurd.
thing is, Iron? Think about this, right? Think about it like this, and I'll frame it. What I'm just gonna do what Jovan said. I'm just gonna try to frame it. The same thing he said. Imagine we took your consciousness, right, Iron?
Yeah,
I
boy.
assume that. Okay, I assume. Think about this, right? I'll just use Nevin as example, right? I'll just use our example. Presumably, you and Nevin, right, have all. If you wanted to fuck her and she wanted to fuck you, that'd be fine, right? Y'all are able to consent, right? All just uncontroversially so, right? And so the idea is, so you're able to fuck Nevin, right? You have everything that's able to fuck everything. You possess everything relevantly needed to fuck Nevin, right? Now let's
Sure.
say that I take your consciousness, just your consciousness, right, and implant it into a 1 or 2-year-old baby's body, right? And then, so that's Iron in there, right? You're just operating a 1 or 2-year-old baby's body, right? Now, if I ask you, now, are you able to consent to sexually to do stuff with Nevin, whether it's just to let Nevin lick your nipples or touch your butt of the baby? Now, if you were to say no, right, and you did say no earlier, the only difference here is the physical body. Okay, so the only thing that the only set of things that you can now appeal to, okay, is the only difference is the physical body. So now, so what makes it wrong has to be in virtue of some property of the body of the baby, right? But
Yeah.
that it just seems strange that if Iron has the body of a 6 foot tall man, he could fuck Nevin. But if somehow Iron shrunk down to a very, very small, tiny little baby looking Iron, and we shrunk all his parts so that it was babies. Now you can't fuck Nevin? Really?
No,
Really?
Yeah, it seems like the only
it's not
argument he's going to be able
strange
to
at all.
make
It's
is
not
that
strange at all because there's a teleologic basis for sex where the purpose of sex is for reproduction or for strengthening relationships that are prone to reproduction, such as in marriage.
What?
So, of course,
Okay,
it
now you're
follows
just
that a
being
1-year-old
retarded.
can't be
Now you're
fucking
just being
an
completely
adult.
retarded.
How's that
Now you
retarded?
just Well, I'm saying now you've just reframed the entire discussion. Now you've just
No,
now
I'm
you're
just giving you
So
an
wait,
account for.
so it's wrong for 2 adults to meet each other and have sex, 2 consenting adults?
yeah. Now
In my view,
yeah,
it is.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Wow.
Dude, he's
You just
If they're not
changed
married.
everything.
Yeah, you're so fail, dude. I hate you.
Well, I'm consistent.
No, you're garbage.
That's so sad.
Teleology is an account for why it would be wrong bodily
That's so
for a
sad.
1-year-old to
That
have
type
sex
of
with an
move,
adult.
that type of move is just like the most pathetic thing.
How is that a move? That's my worldview.
You're retarded, dude.
And now you're
Congratulations.
just
man.
name calling because you don't like that I had a response to you. You thought you had a gotcha, but you
No, I'm
didn't.
saying like if you think changing the subject is like a win,
I didn't change the subject.
he doesn't get it.
You said it's pinned down to the body, and I agreed with you. Explained
What I'm saying is, like, we were accepting a standard criterion for consent in the whole conversation, all the way up until this point, until I basically got you to realize that you had a problem with your view. And then right when you realized you had a problem with your view, right, you changed into a fucking, like, a teleological, like a normative view of having sex, right, that no longer
No.
revolved around consent and
no. I
revolved
said
around the
that
purpose.
I said they could
So, like,
consent. I said
no,
it's
so what that
wrong.
means is you're no longer talking about consent, you're just talking about purpose, right?
No, Shamos, I
like-
said they could consent. I said it would still be wrong.
Like we're in there talking about consent, and Iron comes in and just talks about how
Yeah.
sex is wrong.
It's a
Period.
subject change. It's a subject change. It's just sad. That's what I'm saying. It's not. You're just you're garbage, bro. I don't even want to fuck with you anymore.
I just want to see how far the rabbit hole goes. Iron or Socradeez, are you still there? I
Yep.
don't even want to talk to Iron. Socradeez, if you didn't object to fucking a 10-year-old, would you object to fucking a 10-year-old?
If I didn't object to fucking a 10-year-old, would I object to fucking a 10-year-old? That's just an interesting, straightforward inference, right?
Well, that's what I think, but I'm actually doubtful.
Is that a yes or no question? Is that yes or no?
I just don't want to say yes to that, so I'm just not going to answer that. It's just really gross. to say.
Oh, it does.
Wait, what?
It goes goes
It's really
really
gross.
deep.
You
It's really
can't
gross to
say.
say.
See, this is
I
the
just
type
can't
of
say
thing
it.
that This is the type of thing that I suspected.
Look, Socrates, if I like to
What, that
fuck
people
kids,
are
then I would like to fuck
revolted
kids.
by-
That's not hard to say.
It's just saying those words. Like, no, I should say that, but
This question you say ew?
it's a really gross thing to say.
It's revolting to say. It's just revolting.
Logic
Oh
is
yeah, but
revolting to
you
these people.
agree it's trivially true, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Iron is just so dishonest, man.
I haven't said anything dishonest. You guys are the ones whose position is that the only relevant aspect to sexual relations is consent. I don't agree.
Fully informed,
Who said that?
coercive free consent.
That's what
thought
Shamos
we were
said. He
talking
said
about
anything
consent.
outside of consent was changing the subject.
So how
Iron,
was that what you just said?
What do you think the word consent means in the context of sexual discussion? It just means that once you're able to consent, that's all the stuff you need to be able to fulfill in order to have sex and for it to be okay. That's just what it means. That's what it means. That's what the word fucking consent means, you dumbass.
Unless,
No.
or like,
God.
other,
It doesn't follow that just because you
Third
consent to
sex.
sexual relations that they're okay to do, right? Like
Yes, it
sexuality.
does. That's what the word means. Yeah, that's what the fucking English word means. If you're able to consent, it means it's okay. That's you. You can't.
No,
you can't
that doesn't follow,
he-
Shamos.
No,
he's
what,
able to consent.
wait, what
but
Iron
it's
is
not
implying
okay.
is if there's other like
Just-
things to consider, like harm, right? Say you had
This
sex
is
and the
fucking-
person would die.
All of those things would be factored into consent.
No,
this
like,
is
say-
just homosexuality,
idiot.
This
right?
is
That's not
fucking
true.
retarded, right? The word consent does not mean that it is good or okay, right? The word consent means permission. All right. So if someone gives permission to kill someone else, they give you their consent. That does not make it okay. This is fucking retarded.
Permissibility means okay. When I say that's permissible, that means it's okay to do. When I say something it's impermissible, that means it's not okay to do. Okay?
Okay, is the
So-
word consent mean permissible or means that
Yes.
someone is giving permission? Doesn't
Yes,
mean that
that's
it's
what it-
permissible. It does not mean permissible
If I give
in like
permission, then it's
you're talking
permissible,
over me.
dumbass.
You're talking over me. You're a fucking
Yeah, if I
retard.
give you permission,
If
it's
something's
permissible.
permissible to society, that's different than it being permissible to one person. If one person gives
What does that have
consent,
to do with anything?
that doesn't mean that everyone else is going to be okay with it. So if I give consent for you to chop my head off, everyone else might not be fucking okay with
No
that and
sh-
might say
no
that it's
shit,
wrong.
dude.
That
No,
doesn't give you ultimate moral basis for anything, you fucking
All right, you're
retard.
just being irrelevant. You don't know what you're talking about.
I like this guy.
That was never
Refute what I
understood.
said. Refute
was
what I
never
said,
under
you fucking
contention.
retard. And by
Who
the
is
way,
this guy?
by the way, Shamos, and we've talked before, you're just fucking retarded. By the way, if you understand anything about the human body and how it reacts, then you wouldn't be saying that a 12-year-old could legitimately give consent, because there's legitimately no way that a 12-year-old, no matter how sexually smart they are, would be able to understand what they're giving consent to at the age of 12.
That's just question begging. Get the fuck out of here. You're garbage.
It's actually science. I'm sorry you don't understand what that is. What facts and evidence and real arguments are. I gave you an argument, and all you can say to that argument is that it's garbage. You're a fucking retard.
You didn't give any argument, right? You just said that consent was about permission, right? Not whether it was okay. And I told you giving someone permission is saying that it's okay for them to do something. So that just made you look like a fool, okay?
No,
Consent-
retard. It's giving permission from yourself means it's okay to you. Not okay in a general sense, right? Not okay to
No one
society
ever
at large.
disputed that. No one ever disputed that, not once. You just made that up in your head as if someone disputed that. Okay?
You
Giving
are
permission doesn't
disputing
mean that
that.
it's okay
You're
for you to do it.
You're
If I
saying
give
that
you
if
permission to have
one
sex with me, that doesn't mean that you can have sex with my mom. Okay? You're a fucking moron. No one disputed that. Fuck off.
dumbass, if you give me permission to chop off your head, that doesn't mean that it's okay for me to chop off your head. If you give me permission to kill you, that doesn't make it okay, you fucking retard.
Yeah, I agree.
Here's a more
I
real
agree,
world
but we were
example,
never
right?
talking
Say
about
you were
we
a
were
meth
never
addict.
talking about consent to being able to harm someone in murder, etc. We never were talking about that. I actually agree with you on those instances. Of course. Why? Because I think that those type of things are wrong in every instance.
So the word consent doesn't mean okay. You can't
Look,
have it both ways. You can't have it in one situation and not the other. You would have to
weren't
explain why only consent is needed to make it
not
okay
listening.
to have sex. You can't just say the word consent makes it okay. You can give consent to have yourself killed, but that doesn't necessarily make it okay.
You obviously haven't been listening to this conversation. We never meant by consent merely saying okay. We meant by consent a philosophically rigorous examination called the philosophy of consent, and it has to do with necessary conditions of consent. And that we never meant just by saying, yeah, go ahead, it's okay. We never ever meant that once. For you to sit here and pretend like that's what we were talking about shows you weren't listening. You didn't listen once to this conversation. When we said consent, we didn't mean someone giving a verbal utterance of okay. Never did we mean that. Never.
Philosophical consent doesn't imply okayness, though.
Look, even if you add, like, you sprinkle some magical bullshit about, like, being able to understand the implications of what's being done, it's not okay. You can still give consent for someone else to kill you, and the rest of society would say that it's not right. That it is wrong.
I agree with you in the example of giving someone consent to kill. I don't think anyone can consent to that. I think the only one that can consent to that are certain. I think the only one that works on euthanasia,
did you hear that?
like people that have like terminal illnesses. Now I think.
Hold on, Shamos, did you hear that?
No, just stop. I don't care
screwed
what
up.
you want. You go ahead and tell him. You go ahead and tell him what he screwed up on. I just want to make my point, and you go ahead and make that excellent point that you have there. Okay, so I think that it is okay to consent to have someone kill you in certain cases like euthanasia and terminal illnesses where they're in a lot of pain. But absent those instances, yeah, I think every other instance is going to be wrong. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about consent in terms of sexual relations. Okay, and so I don't know what bringing up any of that matter. Now, Seth, go ahead and make your grand point.
Oh, it wasn't that grand. It's just that, I mean, he said that he's talking about whether or not something is really okay. He's talking about, what's right and what's wrong. But he just appealed to the general opinion on whether it's right or wrong. He said just because you agree that it's okay to kill you doesn't mean that anyone else would think that was okay. I don't know why that matters.
That's because I was trying to say that just because two parties consent to something doesn't mean that it's okay to do it, right?
Well, look, it's your own opinion if it's coming from you.
Listen.
So if it's coming from the rest of society, it's opinion as well. That's
You know
not
where
what
confusion
ultimately
has come
makes
in?
anything good or bad. You'd have to have some sort of criteria that fits that.
Look, I've already given the criteria, so you obviously weren't listening 2 times in this conversation. Okay, here's what the problem is here. You guys are equivocating on the words consent. I already told you what I meant by consent. I'll explain it to you one more time. Consent, right? In the sense that I'm talking about of consenting to have a sexual relationship, right? Is having access to certain relevant conditions that give you, the right or give you the ability to make an informed consensual decision. I already outlined what some of those are. Not being coerced, okay, not being impaired by drugs, having proper cognitive faculties to relevantly and reasonably understand the consequences and all of the things at play, etc. Stuff like that. Okay, that's what I mean by consent. Not merely saying, yeah, sure, it's okay.
All of
Because
those can
you
be
can have
played
a
as an
retard
example.
person could say okay, a really drunk person could say okay, and it still would not be consent. So that's not what I mean by consent. So what I meant by consent, it's just trivially true that if you can consent, then it's okay for you if you consent to having sex, then it's okay for you to have sex with them. That's just
Right. That
one.
doesn't logically follow. Your if
It
then
does
doesn't
logically
logically
follow
follow. You
because
have
it's what I
premise
mean by
one.
consent.
Your premise one leads to conclusion one, and you have no premise two.
Okay, you're just speaking nonsense now.
That's how logic works. What's your second
Bro,
premise?
what are you even talking about? There's never even a first premise. Do you think I laid down a syllogism? What are you talking about? You're just a fucking troll, son.
So it's not. So what you're talking about isn't logical. You're just saying, if then.
Bro,
Let's
I
just
think
let's
you're
just
very
let's just do a baseline here. Sar, if you didn't object to having sex with a 10-year-old, would you object to it?
Would I personally object to having sex with a what 10-year-old?
If you didn't object to having sex with a 10-year-old, would you object to it?
If I didn't object to having sex with a 10-year-old, would I object to it? Is that the question?
Yes.
Well, if I didn't object, then I suppose I wouldn't object, right? That's just the tautology.
It's trivially true. That's basically what's being presented to you, and you're saying no. Or you're saying you would object.
Yeah, exactly. So listen to what I'm telling you. Consent. What I mean by consent, right? Specifically in the terms of sexual, we're just talking about sexual consent. Okay. What I mean by sexual consent is if you can make an informed consensual decision about a sexual act, right? Okay, if you can make an informed consensual decision, then what that means is it's okay for you to have sex. Okay, that's what it means. It means that you're informed. That's just so it's just trivially true. It's like a tautology. It just means that if you have these conditions, if you're not impaired, if you're not coerced, and if you're relatively cognitively healthy and understanding of the relevant consequences, then you're able to make an informed decision about having a sexual relationship, right? And what that means is it's okay for you to have sex because why?
How does
Because
that follow?
you're an adult, you
So-
have all the right capacities, and you made the decision for yourself, and that's why it's okay. And so it's just trivial. It's you can't say, listen, this is where you've made a contradiction. If you say they can consent, but it's wrong for them to have sex, that's a contradiction. Consent
No,
is
it's
defined
not.
in terms of it
No,
being right for them.
Iron is saying that it's not okay to have sex unless it's for reproduction. That includes amongst two consenting adults. 240 and Iron's
told you that
viewpoint, if
subject
I'm not
change.
mistaken.
I
If
told
two
you.
40-year-olds have sex,
We can use
I
a less
told
inflammatory. We can
I
use a
told
less
you that that's a
decisive
different case.
example, right?
That's a different case. But he's
We
appealing.
can use a different example, like married people. A married person can consent to an adulterous affair with another person that consents. It doesn't mean that's okay for those two people to have sex when they're engaging in adultery. There's all kinds of examples where people consent to having sex that isn't okay.
Yeah, but what you're doing there is you're actually having a different debate than what we're having, right? And it's sophistry is what's going on here. I don't think you're doing it intentionally, right? But basically what you're talking about with respect to with respect to those type of people, Iron, like what was the example that you just appealed to? One more time, really quickly, because I want to.
A married man having an affair with a consenting
Right. So
consenting
you're
mistress.
appealing to things like deontological principles. Like in the case in the case of this one, even if they consented, it's still wrong for you to like violate the pact of marriage. So you're like you're saying like and so in the other one you were saying something like if we had the view that sex was only for the purpose of procreation, then that would introduce like another category rather than just consent, right? Because you could fulfill the consent. What it's basically doing is like entering another necessary condition. But that necessary condition is unrelated to what normal people think about consent, right? It's usually tied to some social deontological principle like fucking, not cheating on your wife, or it's, tied to some other. So what I'm saying is that, like, that's basically what's going on there is like sophistry. And I don't think you're doing it intentionally. But it's not the same. It's not the same question. It's a different question entirely.
Just because something isn't the norm
It's
means
just like
wrong, right? You'd
all
have
saying,
to
Iron, is
convince
something
him.
super trivial. It's Iron. I just want to be clear. All it is saying something super trivial. It's just saying like this, Shamos. What if people accept your criterion of consent, but they also had one other principle in there? They added one other condition, and that condition could be whatever. Has to be for sexual reproduction, or cannot cheat on your wife, right? And so it would just follow, if you wanted to introduce a condition like that, then it's just trivial. Of course, you could still consent, and it would but yet it would still be wrong for you to have sex. Yeah, I agree.
I think we
I
have
don't
that
think he's
condition about
posing a what if. I think that's his worldview.
No, what I'm saying is I agree. I'm just being honest with you. I agree 100% that if you introduce a condition like that, then the statement that you're able to consent, yes, yet it's still wrong to have sex, that is coherent under that framework, okay? But what I was just saying is that's just a kind of a subject change from the standard consent debate, because most people in the consent debate are worried about just the standard principles of what it would need for a person to make the subjective psychological evaluation of being able to make the decision to consent, right? And they're not talking about like deontological principles or like all these other, like these are different questions than that. These aren't usually circulated in the consent debate. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, you're right, but it's just kind of trivial.